Welcome to In Context. This is the Liberty News and War Report for February 20th, 2012. My name is Ken McDermott Rowe.
I'm Gus Cantivero.
One of the stories we've been following is the Ron Paul campaign for the Republican nomination. Did Ron Paul win in Maine?
That's a good question. As it was reported, prematurely, of course, before all the counties have had a chance to vote, they said that he lost by a really narrow vote total of only 196 votes to Mitt Romney, who was the favorite in the state. But if Ron Paul had a chance to win outright any state, it was going to be Maine. So he came in 196 votes short, which is a frustratingly razor-thin margin by all accounts. No one wants to lose by that few votes. There were several counties that were delayed because of an impending snowstorm. It turned out to only be an inch of snow. For Maine, I think that that's probably considered a dusting. I think for most places that's considered a dusting, except for Seattle, where they can no longer get up any hill after an inch of snow. And there were a couple of really shady things that had happened that night, where Belfast County and Waldo County specifically were actually reported as a big donut, as if nobody had voted at all. And Matt McDonald was the county or the chairman of the Belfast County caucus, and he called in the results to the GOP headquarters. And he was told that they already had the results.
Do we know what the results were that were called in?
Yeah, the results were, there was only 22 votes, I believe, and 9 were for Romney and 2 were for Ron Paul, the rest being divvied up. And he said that's not even close. Ron Paul won. He got 9 votes.
Oh, no, the official report was that Romney had won, but the guy who called in from the caucus actually said Ron Paul had won.
It was the exact opposite of the vote total, saying that Ron Paul had gotten 9 votes and he was the winner. So they said, oh, well, don't worry about it. We've already got the numbers. And he said, no, ma'am, these are wrong. Ask any of the people who were here. Because he was actually instructed not to read the results publicly. He was supposed to just take the results and report the results so that no one would know what they were. But they took a motion at the meeting, and it was voted unanimously that all votes would be a matter of public record. They'd be said verbally aloud so that everybody would know what they were. And instead, he told the person that... we read them out loud. Ask anyone who was here. And
so
they'll
this
tell
looks
you that
like
this
it could be another playing with the votes, vote rigging.
Exactly. So what happened was they changed the votes, but except that they changed them to 0. So they wiped it out. So they took out the wrong vote, but they just zeroed it out.
So we don't know who won, but this was the first caucus that looked like Ron Paul was going to win. Although I think he might have won in Iowa. The polls of people going into the caucuses showed him leading, and then when the votes counted, he ends up in 3rd place. So who knows?
What we end up with here is that the state GOP chairman has been pressured, and he said that he got death threats and thousands of emails from angry voters. And I don't know about the death threats. I don't even know if he's telling the truth there. But he said he's not going to make the situation any more complicated than it already is. So even though he now knows what the proper vote totals are from those missing counties, he's not going to release it publicly. Now I'm saying, well, why?
What kind of an election is that?
That's silly. Let's just release the proper numbers, get it correct. Even if your argument is, well, it doesn't matter because this is just a presidential preference straw poll. It really doesn't matter. It's non-binding. But then why do we place so much emphasis on this?
We don't know if the vote was rigged in Iowa or Maine or in other places, but it's pretty clear that it's been rigged in presidential elections in Ohio for Bush against Kerry.
Absolutely.
And probably in Florida as well. So this is what's going on. So if it were happening, it wouldn't be the biggest surprise in the world.
No, not in the slightest. I mean, on the one positive note is that they're non-binding delegates, so it doesn't really matter the overall number, but it does make a splash in the media. Having a win in a state does build momentum for a campaign.
And it's allowed to the fact that Ron Paul hasn't won any caucuses or primaries has helped keep him away from the main part of the debate, which we have said consistently is what the Republican Party in the country really needs, is for a debate between Ron Paul and whoever the front runner is, Romney or Gingrich or Santorum, over issues like the war, over the Federal Reserve's power in this country, so that we can get these issues front and center before the American public.
For sure. Ron Paul supporters out there, rest assured that he got the majority of the delegates because afterward they nominate their delegates who are going to go from each county up to the state convention. From there, they nominate who their final delegates are going to be to go to the national convention this year in Tampa Bay, right?
So he's going to be there with delegates.
He's going to have a significant number of delegates at the end of this. And I don't mean just a couple dozen. I mean a significant number of delegates.
So we'll see how it plays out, whether they marginalize him at the convention. I don't see how they really can compromise on, for example, the issue of the war. There's no way of I think, making peace. And that's why I think it's very possible there's going to be an independent run for president. If not by Ron Paul, maybe by somebody else. There needs to be some anti-war option.
For sure. I mean, just economically, we can't sustain the wars. It's too much money. We can't afford it. We're borrowing money. The Pentagon is buying $230 million of gasoline a day just to keep the tanks, the Humvees, the jets, the submarines going. It's impossible to sustain this. It's driving up the cost of gasoline for us here. And look,
and the president just submitted a budget for this, which for this year, well, for next year, but this year's budget is going to show a deficit of about $1.3 trillion. And that's, I don't think, counting this payroll tax cut, which is a really cockamamie idea, I think, because it's defunding Social Security. They should cut the income tax if they want to, but going after Social Security as a way of stimulating the economy is really a half-assed idea.
Definitely. Why don't we move on to the...
Well, we're talking about the war on terror. Part of it is really premised on the threat of domestic terror. We've been hearing that over and over again, and now we've had the latest arrest of a terrorist, this time supposedly targeting the Capitol.
Yeah, and his name is Amine el Khalifi. Right? Yep, Khalifi, and he's a Moroccan national. He immigrated here to the United States several years ago. He's only 29 years old, and he was essentially recruited by the FBI by them identifying him as somebody who is a malcontent. He's unhappy. He's young. He's a Muslim. And so they go ahead and they supply him with the weapons, with the bomb vest, with the plot, the whole deal.
We've heard this story before.
We've heard this story many times before. Last year in May 2011, there were the two guys from Queens who were going to bomb a synagogue and another building. And it turns out, again, provocateured by the FBI. They're given the materials, they're given the plans, they're given the refinements on how to carry it out. Then they go to actually do it and nothing works. And why,
and these are old tricks. They were used a lot during the Vietnam War in order to throw off the trail the anti-war movement, particularly in college campuses. What people would show up and say, "Hey guys, if you really are against the war, I think you ought to bomb the ROTC center." And it worked. People would get arrested, and the guy who did it then would move on to his next victim.
And it's almost impossible to find a terror case or suspected terror case in the last 10, 15 years or longer, 20 years, go back to the first World Trade Center building. It's almost impossible to find one that wasn't provocateured and provided with the material by the FBI. They really should change their name to the Federal Department of Terror because they seem to be the best at this. They come up with some pretty good ideas. My question or concern is, when is it going to come to the point where one of these radicals seeks out the FBI in order to get the green light to go ahead and swaps out the fake bomb for the real bomb? And because they give them the chance to go ahead and pull the trigger, at which point they get a poof, we'll actually get a boom because they realize that they've been played for a fool.
These things are pretty well constructed pieces of theater, I think. They follow these guys for a long time before they actually pull the arrest off. And it seems to me that one of the main points is that if any of our adversaries overseas, people who are really struggling, who are fighting back against the wars we're waging against them, for Iran, for example, if they wanted to hit us in the United States, they could do so. These are not, it's like the supposed plot to kill the Saudi Arabian ambassador. I mean, these are not...
Yeah, that's another joke.
Our foreign adversaries could hit us pretty easily, but they just don't do it. For whatever reason...
This just isn't the way that they do things.
Right.
I mean, we've been looking at articles this morning. There was a Washington Times op-ed that we were looking at that was saying, this is just the MO of Muslims. Muslims are the only ones who carry out terror. As if they've never heard of Hindu suicide bombers or anything of these or other nationalities committing acts of terror. I mean, but provocateuring these attacks is the way that these things happen. I mean, the first World Trade Center was set up entirely by the FBI. They went out and they found who was willing to do it through a front man, and they provided. They told him, provide him with a fake trigger and a fake bomb, and then they said, give him a real trigger with a fake bomb, and then they said, give him a real trigger with a real bomb, and now let him go ahead and do it. And they said, it'll be like a stronger case. We'll just catch him in the act. But in the end, when he's successful and actually tries to blow up the building and puts the van on the wrong column so that the building didn't come down, thank God that he actually failed that time, saved a lot of lives, it shows how far they're willing to go to actually get one of these cases. And what's the ultimate goal here? It just seems like it's for the scare.
It's for the scare. It's to keep up the war scare, keep us behind this war, which is bankrupting this country, which we don't need, and we should end as soon as possible and start investing in this country to deal with the very high levels of unemployment we have here, declining real wages. That's a threat to American security.
Yeah.
This not the stuff going overseas. And these false flag operations, call them what they are, false flag operations, deceptions, time-honored techniques of the national security apparatus. The real victims here are our civil rights. And it was very interesting to see, Gus, that one of the state of Virginia has struck back at one of these war on terror provisions. As many people know, although not to the corporate media, in the National Defense Authorization Act for 2012 were provisions giving President Obama the authority to have the military arrest people, put them in military prisons without trial indefinitely, subject to military courts.
Yeah.
And the state of Virginia, the House of Delegates voted overwhelmingly in favor of a bill that would prevent the use of any agency of the Virginia state government or any Virginia National Guard, prevent them from being used in carrying out what they feel is this unconstitutional law to arrest people and put them under military custody. And that was approved by 96-4. Now, I don't know if it'll become law because apparently the governor of Virginia says he's going to veto it. But I take this is invoking a very important American tradition called nullification, which goes back at least to 1798, and during a similar period when President John Adams imposed the alien and sedition laws, which would call for fines and imprisonment of people who criticized the government.
Yeah.
And Jefferson said,
that's an ugly law that's reared its head a couple times in our history.
and this is in the tradition. This Patriot Act, this military arrest provision, all in the tradition of the alien sedition laws. And so it's time to bring back Thomas Jefferson. I'm very pleased to see that the Virginia, his home state, has decided to stand up to the federal government and assert our constitutional rights.
And it's funny, whenever these laws like the NDAA with its unlimited detention provisions in there given to the president as if he's king, who these laws are actually enforced against is never who they say it's written for, which is why you just can't trust a monolithic government with unlimited power. To think that they're going to keep us safe is a completely fraudulent argument because they never seem to use it against who they pretend that it's for. They send out all these warnings to. Did you see the ones where they send it out to all these different groups like realtors, to bait and tackle shops, to surveillance equipment companies, to gun shops, and it was all about what suspicious activity to look for, right?
Yeah.
And it was like people with blue jeans who are a little antisocial, and maybe they wear hoods, or maybe they like.
They keep bringing back this tips program. Everybody's supposed to be a spy.
Yeah,
right?
call and make sure you give the word tripwire, and that's the code word, so we know to take you seriously. And it was like, if you have a farm center, if someone wants to buy fertilizer and they have chemical burns on their hands, they might be a terrorist.
Right.
Like, come on, man, that's everyone who works on a farm. Are you serious? That's ridiculous. It's everybody. We're supposed to just report on everybody. And at the bottom it says just because they do one of these things doesn't mean they're a terrorist. Well, then why'd you put it in the list?
Well, it's to keep up the scare, so we keep going with the stupid wars.
It just angers me because, who exactly are we supposed to be fighting against here? It seems like we're undermining ourselves so that we have no union left. We're just going to be fighting against ourselves so that there's not an ounce of unity in this country.
The only way we're going to get out of this is to have a union of populists, left, right, center, who want to put a stop to this crazy war nonsense and start building America again. So this is a theme we're going to keep coming back to In Context. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Oh, it's made for